All right, welcome everyone to the Future of Nanite Foliage session. It's a bit of a bombastic title maybe, but there's a lot of cool stuff to unpack here. I'm Simon. I'm the lead meditation artist at Epic, working on the Quixel team, creating foliage content.
Hi, I'm Hassan, and I'm one of the engineers working on the procedural vegetation editor plugin.
So the agenda for today is that we're going to go over the various components that is Nanite Foliage. We will be covering a little bit about animation, so hopefully you'll be able to catch the talk yesterday, went into more detail about it. But we will go over the broad strokes here as well. We will take a look at the voxels, the new shape preservation method available from Nanite Foliage. We'll go over some examples that we've been working on to test out these new workflows and this new exciting tech. And lastly, we're going to first look at the procedural vegetation editor that's shipping as experimental in 5.7. Digital foliage is hard. Let me start with that. So do send help. We need it. We're trying to accurately represent these very highly complex things while taking into account a lot of different parameters like performance, visual quality, art direction, etc. There's definitely a lot going on here, from botanical rules that make things look believable, complex material behaviors, and much more. The content today requires super high level of fidelity. We want to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, of course, but at the same time, we also want to have experiences that run at 60 FPS on current gen hardware. And as we all probably know by now, Nanite runs a lot better without mask materials. So when we are working with Nanite, opaque geometry is preferred. Which do leave a lot of questions on how do we successfully build foliage assets with this kind of new paradigm in mind? And how do we make this all work together? By going opaque meshes, we can start to see the benefit it has on rendering already. And we can also start to touch on some really interesting levels of fidelity with allowing more geometry to be fully realized. Problem, however, these very large meshes ended up being incredibly heavy on mesh data alone. So big disk space, a lot of memory usage. As you can see in this example over here. We did start out early days kind of trying out a fully modeled spruce tree early in development, but it started to shoot very high very quickly when it came to file size. Nanite did unlock so much potential everywhere. We can build these really intricate scenes with tons of detail, assets, lights, and more, but foliage was quite not able to keep up and get the same benefits. We were trying lots of different approaches, like do we start somewhere mid-poly, do we even start more low-poly, do we stamp out the geometry in post and so on, to get it kind of fully opaque? But we were never really able to get an asset that had a desirable size on disk and also the detail we were aiming for. But okay, it wasn't really that bad, but you get the point. And of course, I'm just being a bit overdramatic here on this because I'm just an artist complaining that I want to make more cool stuff. Just give me more, basically. But Nanite Foliage is just so exciting. It opens up so much more options for us for content. So there were a few things we needed to solve. We needed to solve the file size and memory usage. Animation also needed a new solution. WPO just weren't cutting it for these high complex meshes. As kind of vertice counts goes up, the cost also goes up. And what about the distances? Kind of near and far away from you. We needed something that was stable visually, performant, and also kept a lot of the volumes intact. So in came Nanite Foliage. So let's dive into what it actually is. So now we're looking at breaking apart these massive trees into smaller instance components instead. Keeping each part of the asset very lightweight, but still able to reach a lot higher fidelity than we used to be able to. These are Nanite assemblies. They are referencing smaller individual branch components that can then be rescattered on a core tree shape. Several assets can also reference the same kit of branches, so you can derive multiple variations from the same set. You can see the reference list this will generate under the Nanite settings in your asset browser, or in your asset viewer, rather. These instance components are basically all the different branches or parts you will need to build your tree with, or even plant and unsharp as well. Since we're dealing with instances here, you may need to build a lot more variation of branches using this approach than previously, as you may want to have certain branches in different parts of your tree. As you're not quite able to store unique deformations, as you can only store transforms on these instances, you may want to have a bit more to work with to get all the shapes you want. So for example, you may want to have flatter branches at the bottom of your tree. You may be more clustered, almost like bouquet-shaped clusters as you move up the tree. So you kind of have to pre-build these variations instead and then scatter them out. However, since we are going full geometry here, there are some more benefits. We can add quite a few more variations now, because we can, for example, have fewer leaves, reuse them across several branches. And if you were to kind of adopt more of a trim sheet-like texture for all the bark surfaces and the branch surfaces instead, we can kind of almost generate endless variety and still have a very high resolution texture. As in the past, we were kind of a bit locked by all the negative space by having branches in the actual texture. You kind of paid for a lot of nothing, really, but now we can kind of optimize this. We're still experimenting with kind of finding a good balance here, like what should be 3D, what can be more 2D based. Also kind of early stuff for us as well. But this seems to give us very promising results. So now after we've done all these things, if we look back at that tree we mentioned earlier, take another stab at it using instances, we can see that we have jumped quite a bit in triangle count, which may look very scary, but do keep in mind that this is actually instance geometry now. But what you can see as well is that the size of the asset has dropped significantly from before. I think we've seen somewhere around 5 to 10% of what it were without Nanite assemblies in general. There's some additional footprint added from all the instance meshes as well, of course. But even with those added on top of this, it's still way, way below the previous numbers. And as a bonus, with a higher textile density of our parts, we can most likely keep the textures a lot smaller as well, since we're not paying for that pesky negative space in the textures. And on a visual level, it allows us to reach more botanically correct structures, which helps with believability of our assets. And it really adds more when it comes to like self-shadowing, subsurface layering, and just basically look a bit more plausible. And as I mentioned in the beginning, nature is very complex, and being able to add a lot of these small kind of details just helps us sell the look of it. So now we could add things like catkins, seeds, nuts, buds as actual geometry, and have them react very well with the lighting and the environment around them, which is kind of nuts. All right, moving on from terrible puns onto animation. So we needed something new to deal with wind. As mentioned, WPO is not great when dealing with these color meshes. Cost just accumulates very quickly as density goes up. We needed to come up with a different way to do this. We're still in the early days of exploring this fully, but we are looking at skin geometry as a solution. We can make great performance saving by using bones and having them move the trees around instead of relying on WPO solutions. We can also better control the bounds using this method, since when using WPO, for example, you usually have to extend them quite a lot to account for big movements. But now we have way more better control of this, using bones instead. So how are we generating the bone structure? At least on our end, in our internal pipeline, we already kind of have a spline skeleton for all the trees and the plants we're making. As we're using, we're simulating tree growth and plant growth in our internal pipeline. And what you can do is you can take those splines and actually generate a skeleton from them and actually skin the output asset back onto it and use that for wind animation. We do apply some bone reduction as well to the amount of bones where we've seen necessary, but we have seen that bone counts of a couple of hundred up to 1,000 seems to work pretty well, actually. So each of these Nanite assemblies have their own dedicated skeleton, which you can see in this greatly colored 80s style debug view. But they all have their own dedicated skeleton. It's used for animation and moving the trees around. These skeletons can also then be used together with the new dynamic wind plugin that is also shipping as experimental in 5.7. By utilizing simulation group data we provide to the skeleton, the system can then move the trees around and apply the appropriate resistances based on that data. Here you can see an early example of it running in one of our test scenes. And the kind of cool thing about this is that using no masking, no WPO, just full-on geometry, full-on Basilian triangle mode, and it all kind of works, which I find quite exciting. Another part of the puzzle is voxels. So we got rid of masking, we moved away from WPO. So now, how do we fill our worlds? How do we make them look lush and like realistic? Where can you find this new feature? So you can find it under the shape preservation method under your Nanite settings. You can just turn on voxelize, and there you go. There are some settings here you can play around with. You can lower or increase the number of rays depending if it's a complex object or a simple object, but it will affect your Nanite build times. But it can be tweaked to your different needs. With voxel level, what you can do, you can override the default behavior to essentially have the voxels coming closer to you, if that's desired. But the way they're set up by default is that they are trying to kick in when they're the size of a pixel or subpixel. So the idea is that they shouldn't actually be that noticeable to you. So what do they do? How do they look like? They are simplifying your tree shapes in the Nanite builder step. And as I get further away from the trees, they will switch over to voxels. They inherit your tree's material properties, so like colors and anything you have in your shader gets transferred onto them. And they're actually a great option to imposters because they actually retain volume from all sides. So for example, if you were to run around a tree further away from it, you would always see the appropriate volume from a distance. And like mentioned, they're not that noticeable when transitioning from triangles to voxels, which is great. Here you can see a very exaggerated video kind of showing where it goes from triangles out to voxels. Might be a little bit hard to see on that screen there. But it's basically switching over from triangles to voxels as you zoom out. And I do promise, it's not me trying to impress you here with my amazing pixel art skills. It's just voxels. And at scale, you can see that it turns an area of very complex meshes into something that is actually way more manageable over distance and still retains very good volume and does really sell the effect. Again, it's very exaggerated here, so you wouldn't really see this in a real example, but just to kind of prove the point. So, I just want to go through a couple of examples we've been working on internally. So we've been working on a bit of a broadleaf forest scene, just trying out all these different features and various approaches and workflows, trying to get it all work together. You're kind of trying to see kind of how far can we push things, like what can be modeled, what should be 3D, what should not be 3D, all these kind of things. Figuring out how many variations of branches do we need per tree to get the dynamic look we're after, the appropriate gravity, and to make everything look dynamic. And in general, we're seeing a lot less over-occlusion in our forest scenes now by using these components instead. As more light is actually coming through and not being blocked by large plane-based geometry or very large distance field meshes. We're trying to see how much variety we can add to the scene as well, like different species, different subvariants, and so on. But we have found that with the pretty small disk size we're getting, we can actually go quite far with variation. I mean, it's pretty efficient use of resources in the end. I can get quite a lot from it. We are using PCG to scatter this level, and all the trees and the saplings are instant skin meshes, all using the dynamic wind for movement. Here's just a quick snapshot of the triangle view of the scene. As you can see, we're getting pretty bonkers here with geometry. We have everything from serrated edge leaves, spruce needles, pine needles, all fully traced out. Looks maybe a bit over the top, but to be honest, it all kind of seems to work pretty well. Here's a quick view of how the voxels actually looks like in the scene. In this example here, you can see that the red is still triangles and the green is the voxels. But as you can see, your immediate surroundings are actually replaced by voxels, which makes it quite efficient to render. And if we kind of zoom out and go above the canopies here, you can see that there's actually a lot of voxels versus triangles in the screen percentage. And it still all looks pretty good, I would say. Not this image though, this green and red, but you get the point. Before we head into our last section, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of background tooling-wise, where we're coming from. So we have an internal pipeline for creating foliage, which we've used extensively to create the previous tree packs we made from Quixel. It's been used in various demos that are featuring foliage like Electric Dreams, for example. At its core, it's using a hormone and energy-based growth algorithm to actually simulate tree shapes and how they behave in nature. You can set certain parameters to affect what type of growth you will get. You can kind of shape it around a bit and, art direct it by using parameters. For us, it offers a highly flexible suite of tools where you can use procedural methods together with a hands-on art direction as well. It is quite advanced system by now, but it does fit our internal need at Quixel for creating believable foliage quickly and at scale. But it may not be how I want to bring a tool out to the community. So we did start investigating into how could you bring this into Unreal instead. So, introducing the Procedural Vegetation Editor, or PVE for short, which may be a term you all know pretty well already, which will be available as an experimental plugin for 5.7. In this first iteration, it will focus on generating outputs that are compatible with Nanite assemblies, voxels, and animation using the dynamic wind system. It features a node-based graph editor with parametric controls. And for its first experimental release, it will mostly focus on supporting customizing assets from presets. How to enable it? Just go to your plugins and search for Procedural Vegetation Editor or just Vegetation. Click it. You do need Nanite Foliage for this to work, though. It comes with a set of example content that is already set up that you can go through. There are some graphs set up, there's some Nanite assembly parts, there's some already generated trees, there's some textures, materials, and so on. This is currently available in the plugin folder itself, but once you go to 5.7 proper, the idea is to have all these available on Fab, and we will be adding to the library as well. Each asset will contain a graph where you can manipulate the tree variations or plants, or generate new versions, or just edit the ones we have done to your liking. The presets are basically data sets created by us, and they provide some data you can manipulate parametrically. But there's much more we want to do here, of course, as well later. The example content has PCG volumes set up that are connected up to the dynamic wind system. And you can all find these examples in the example zoom app provided in the plugin. There are 4 species set up with 4 variations each, representing older, younger trees and kind of different variations. Some of these trees are pulled from the previous tree pack, so we can now reimagine here to make them available in the tool. But we also added a new one, which is the Quake and Aspen tree. But we'll be adding much more as I did to this library. The branch components that we use to create our assemblies from are provided as well. You can use these on your trees to try out different looks. It's all 3D geometry, so it's all compatible with all these systems. You can swap out the branches, you can even mix them up, create your own Franken trees. Yeah, give it a go. See what you can make. We'll also try to standardize this a bit further, kind of moving forward. So there's a good selection of dead branches, alive branches, and different variations for each kit. This is kind of the first step to this. We're kind of figuring out a bit. Some of you might be already familiar with our global foliage actor, who is making another appearance here, but with a slightly different configuration. It's set up to now use dynamic wind, and we can also control season effects and health effects to this actor as well. You can modify the provided PCG volumes as well if you want to. Here's an example we threw together, just getting all the outputs we had into one single volume, and it created a quick little forest for us. And these assets support seasons by coloring the foliage as well. And so you can set the desired season color in the asset shader itself, and then use the globally controlled foliage actor to control the effect amount on all your trees. And they will all kind of respond to that actor's settings. We just did a quick autumn variation of the forest by just pulling a few sliders here. And as with all of our other assets, it also supports a health system. So you can kind of degrade the foliage by tuning the health parameter in the actor. It kind of works with figuring out gradients of your base color and kind of adding in these more brownish, reddish colors to kind of represent decay. And with that, I will pass it over to Hassan to walk us through the tool itself.
Thank you. Yeah, so currently the tool supports creating Nanite-ready assets that can make use of dynamic wind, voxels, and assemblies. So let's take a deeper dive into what the editor currently offers. So how the tool currently works is that it can take tree-shaped data that we provide that are brought in as presets. Then you're able to modify these shapes parametrically and generate additional variations. Each species, as Simon mentioned, comes in with 4 pre-made variations that you can either modify or create additional assets from. I'll now walk you through some of the nodes in the editor to illustrate the kind of configurability you get. And I'll do that in excruciating detail. Yeah, because we spent a lot of time on this, so yeah, we'll talk you through everything that it does. The tool has different carve functions, enabling you to shorten branches, shorten the main stem from the bottom, or carve by height. It's like taking pruning shears or a saw to your plant. It lets you trim away parts of the structure based on rules that you set, allowing you to control the final shape and size of your vegetation. Pro tip here, you can string along multiple carve nodes in a chain to get the desired result you're looking for. There's a gravity node that makes your plant react to forces in nature, like how real branches bend under their own weight or grow upwards towards the sunlight. You can control which direction this will affect the plant. We can apply angle corrections so that branches already pointing up are less affected. And you can rescale the tree, of course, making it smaller or larger. And you can remove branches based on certain conditions like age, height, which generation it is, and how much light the branch, for example, has received. All these nodes, the deformation nodes, allow you to easily create more variations. So after you've applied shape edits, you can then move on to the mesh builder node. This is where the geometry is being created. You can set parameters to edit the mesh density, for example, min and max segments. Here you have precise control on how the triangle density is distributed across the plant. For example, you can reduce geometry as it gets higher in the canopy, or reduce it inside the convex hull of the tree. You can also assign your bark materials in this step. It supports specifying displacement maps as well, which allow you to modify the trunk or branches geometry. And for some of the samples, we do provide trunk profiles as well that you can choose to apply to the tree. So when you export a plant as a skeletal mesh, the system creates bones. So branches and leaves can be animated by the dynamic wind system, but sometimes these skeletons can have too many bones. And when you have many trees in your scene, for example, when in the order of hundreds of thousands or millions, this could affect performance. So the bone reduction node allows you to reduce the number of bones on your plant to your desired budget. There's a foliage palette node that allows you to visualize the available foliage meshes that come with the preset and optionally swap out some or all of them if you want a different look. For example, in this scene, we're creating a dead version of the maple tree by enabling it to only source the dead branches. There's a foliage distributor node that allows you to override the defaults given in the presets, allowing you to rescatter foliage components across the plant. You can control scale, density, and the type of phyllotaxy of the branches. You can also make your plant look dense and bushy or sparse and pruned depending on your needs. So pro tip here, just using the carve node that we mentioned earlier and this node, you can easily create dozens of variations of the same plant very quickly. So the workflow we're supporting for now is that you configure the plant to your liking, export some variations as assets that you can then add to your level. The output node lets you set the generated assets details like mesh name, its path, and the shape preservation method to be used. Here we do recommend using the skeletal mesh asset type for now, as that is what will be compatible with dynamic wind. So now this is an initial version. It's just the very first step. We're currently ramping up, and there are many more things that we want to add to this in the coming future. For example, we'll be bringing growth system from our internal pipeline that you saw earlier so that you can create plants completely from scratch. We want to let you be able to import trees into the editor so that you can make use of all the existing trees and plants that you already have. Also, supporting a path to non-nanite assets is a priority as well, since we all have target platforms where nanite is not supported. For higher visual fidelity, we'll be adding more branch options, photogrammetry trunks, custom geometry, decorations, and much more. Also, more sophisticated seasons and age options, more sophisticated than we currently provide. And we'll be adding interactive viewport edits and hands-on art direction features, allowing you to have more precise control on the final result. So do enable it and give it a try, and do share your feedback with us. It's early days, but we want to develop this alongside the community as we bring vegetation tools into the editor. Thank you so much.